Hey there, welcome to lesson 8.3, our special right triangles in our right triangles and trigonometry unit. We are going to do this in two parts today. So our first part is going to be our 45, 45, 90 degree triangle. So those are the angles, and notice I have two angles that are the same. So that is going to allow us to conclude these are going to be isosceles triangles, so two legs that are congruent, which makes our two base angles congruent. So you can also find part two, and that will be our 30, 60, 90 degree triangles. If we can do these radical things, and we'll review just like you have reviewed a little bit maybe before in Algebra 1, but if you can do these radical functions or these radical problems, it's going to be super easy, and this is also on the ACT, so you can solve these by using Pythagorean theorem, but it will go much quicker if you can kind of get down the patterns and how these radicals work. So let's go over a few just as a review. So let's look at number 1, square root of 7 times the square root of 7. We know that we can multiply what is inside the house, or I call it the house, the radical, which becomes the square root of 49, which then in turn becomes 7. And notice that that 7 is actually what is underneath both of the houses, so that can kind of be your shortcut. So if you go to number 2, square root of 82 times the square root of 82, the shortcut just says, well, it's 82, because you could do it like this, or you could say, well, it's the square root of 82 squared, and we know that the squared and the square root actually cancels to leave you with that 82. All right, moving on to number 3. What's outside the house talks to what's outside the house, and that's understood 1. And then what's inside the house talks to the inside the house. So 6 times 1 is 6. And we know that the square root of 2 times the square root of 2 just becomes 2. Whatever is outside or becomes outside is multiplied. So that answer is 12. Some people like to add those two together, but it is a multiplication. All right, moving on to number 4, we have this radical in the denominator, and we cannot leave it that way. So we are going to multiply the top by square root of 3 and the bottom by the square root of 3. We do that because of what is in the denominator here. We just multiply because square root of 3 times the square root of 3 becomes 3 in the denominator, which gets rid of that square root. And then 6 times square root of 3, well, they can't talk to each other, so they just become multiplied together. The big thing here is you have to make sure that whatever's outside the house can be simplified even in a fraction. So 6 divided by 3, just normal becomes 2, so that would become 2, and then I have to make sure I finish with my square root of 3. All right, I have 5 divided by square root of 2. Again, cannot leave that square root of 2 on the denominator, so I multiply both the top and the bottom by the square root of 2. That is really just multiplying it by 1, keeping it equivalent. So that denominator becomes 2, square root of 2 times square root of 2, and then 5 square root of 2. Can these two talk to each other? I could simplify that and say 2.5 square root of 2, but you can also just leave it as 5 square root of 2 over 2. All right, and the last one, what's outside of the house talks to each other, what's inside the house talks to each other. So 4 times 5 is 20. Square root of 3 times square root of 3 becomes times 3, which would then be 60. All right, so just some of those radical tools that we can use. So let's get into our lesson. We're talking about 45, 45, 90 degree triangles. Again, they are isosceles, which means my two legs are actually congruent because my base angles are congruent to each other. So the hypotenuse, again, across from the right angle, is square root of 2 times the length of the leg. So here is our formula that we're going to use. Our hypotenuse equals our leg times the square root of 2. Just also right there. All right, let's use some of that, see if we can kind of find some patterns. So I have a 45 degree triangle here and 90, so I know that's 45 too. So then I know that I have two congruent legs because I have two base angles, which means that I can then start using my hypotenuse equals my leg times the square root of 2. X is my hypotenuse. It is across from that right angle, so I'm just going to fill in the blank. X equals 9 square root of 2, and I'm finished. I'm simplified right there. All right, next I have 6 square root of 2 and 6 square root of 2, which means I have an isosceles triangle, which also means I have 45, 45, 90 degree triangle there, so I can use my hypotenuse equals my leg times the square root of 2. X would be my hypotenuse. 6 square root of 2 would be my leg, so I'm going to just fill in the blank. X equals 6 square roots of 2, which is my leg. And I have to make sure I include that square root of 2. I have to finish out my formula. So I'm going to just simplify. X equals 6, and then square root of 2 times square root of 2 is times 2. Do not add them together. 6 equals 12, or X equals 12. My hypotenuse equals 12. All right, go ahead and stop this video and try your checkpoints. All right, there is your check your progress answers. Let's move on to our next one. Now we are trying to find the leg of our 45, 45, 90. The other ones we are trying to find our hypotenuse. All right, so 45, 45, 90 tells me that my legs are congruent. So I'm going to continue with my hypotenuse equals my leg times the square root of 2. I know my hypotenuse is 8. Again, it's across from that right angle. So that's my hypotenuse. My leg is A. So I'm just going to fill in the blank and then we can go from there. So my hypotenuse is 8 equals my leg times the square root of 2. Now I'm going to solve just like normal. I'm going to divide both sides by the square root of 2, which allows that square root of 2 to cancel. So I get A equals 8 divided by the square root of 2. Now we're close to that answer, but remember we can't leave that denominator with a radical. So I'm going to multiply the top by square root of 2 because that's what is here. Divide the bottom by the square root of 2. That allows my denominator to become 2, getting rid of that square root. And then this numerator becomes 8 times the square root of 2. Now, again, we are close, but we have to make sure whatever is outside the house, multiplication, division, adding, and subtracting, is simplified. So 8 divided by 2 becomes 4, and then I have to bring down my square root. So each leg is 2 or 4 square roots of 2. And this one is 4 square roots of 2 as well. All right, stop this video and try your checkpoint very quickly. Here is your answer, and that concludes part 1 of our lesson on special right triangles. You can check out the next video for 30, 60, 90 degree right triangles.